I'm Thatcher Row, 37 years old. I used to be an Air Force pilot, flying through Alaska's icy skies, battling blizzards and personal struggles. Now, I lead a quiet life in Helena, Montana, a calm suburban town. Here vast grassy fields stretch, endlessly marked by old wooden fences and the occasional cow peacefully grazing beneath a wide blue sky. Helena isn't as bustling as big cities or as brutally cold as my old military base. It's a serene place where soft breezes carry the scent of dry grass and old memories. Time seems to slow down, letting me truly breathe and be myself. I live with my daughter, Joey, a 10-year-old girl whose eyes shine like autumn sunlight and whose smile melts all the ice in my heart. We live in a small log cabin nestled along a red dirt road, not far from my grandfather's old farm. The house is nothing fancy, just a few small rooms, a porch overlooking the fields, and an old fireplace I light on cold winter nights. I'm not wealthy in the way people imagine million-dollar heirs. I live simply, without showing off or extravagance. To me, money isn't something to flaunt, but a tool to protect what I value most. Joey, and the memories of my grandfather, who taught me. That honor is a legacy more precious than any treasure. Tonight, like many other nights, I sit in the small living room. It's a golden-orange glow from the table lamp illuminating the dark wooden walls. Joey is fast asleep in her room, her steady breathing echoing through the slightly ajar door. On the table before me is a wooden box, its surface worn smooth by time, where I keep my grandfather's mementos. I open the lid, and the scent of pine wood and old leather hits me, like opening a door to the past. Inside, among yellowed letters and a few black and white photos, I see the silver pocket watch my grandfather always carried. Its face is tarnished, but the inscription on the lid remains crystal clear. Honor is the greatest legacy. I hold the watch, my fingers tracing the inscription. Suddenly, a flood of memories surges back, powerful and unstoppable, like a wave pulling me back to days long gone. I close my eyes, and in that moment, I'm no longer in Helena. I'm back in Bozeman, Montana, my hometown, where golden fields stretched under a cold sky, where I grew up amidst my father's indifference, my younger brother's pampering, and my grandfather's boundless love. As a child, I always felt out of place in my own home. My father, Douglas Rowe, was a former tax official, a domineering man with a piercing gaze and a commanding voice. He always looked at me as if I were an extra object never good enough, never worthy. "Thatcher, stand up straight," he'd bark whenever I lowered my head, even if just to avoid his gaze. To him, I was never enough. Not smart enough, not strong enough, not like Brandon, my younger brother, who was doted on from a young age. Brandon, 5 years my junior, was a blonde-haired boy with a smile that could easily soften anyone's heart. To my father, he was a treasure. Allowed to do things I could never dream of, skipping school, spending money freely, even causing trouble around town without consequence. Brandon's still young. He needs freedom, my father would say, while I, at just 10 years old, was forced to do chores on the farm. From cleaning the stables to chopping firewood, my mother, a gentle but fragile woman, tried to protect me, but she lacked the strength to stand up to my father's overpowering personality. In the end, she left when I was 17, just before I enlisted. I don't blame her. I understand she needed to escape the cage my father had trapped our family in. In those stifling years, my grandfather was my only light. A World War II veteran. He was a tall man with white hair and rough hands, from years of holding a rifle and working the fields. He and my grandmother had built their farm from nothing, turning barren land into a small agricultural empire, enough to make him a millionaire. Without anyone suspecting, my grandmother passed away when I was 23, leaving him alone with his memories and a heart that remained steadfast. He never boasted about his wealth or bragged about his success. To him, a person's worth lay in their honor and how they stood, firm against life's challenges. During summer breaks, I'd escape my father's oppressive home to stay at my grandfather's farm. I still vividly recall him sitting under the old oak tree reading the newspaper, his reading glasses slipping down, his nose. He'd tell me stories of his military days, of battles, of friends who fell, and of how he learned that honor was something neither bought nor sold. "Thatcher," he'd say, his eyes blazing like fire. Life will test you, but if you hold on to integrity and resolve, nothing can defeat you. It was he who encouraged me to enlist. When I was 18, standing at a crossroads in life, he placed his hand on my shoulder and said, "The military will teach you how to be a man, but only you can decide what kind of man you'll become." Those words etched themselves into my mind like the inscription on his pocket watch, becoming the compass for every decision I've made since. I still remember the day I left Bozeman, standing in the middle of a golden field scorched by the August sun, an old suitcase lying alone at my feet. My grandfather stood a few steps away under the shade of the old oak tree, his white hair shimmering in the breeze. He didn't say anything, just waved, his eyes blazing as if to tell me he believed I wouldn't let him down. My father didn't see me off. Brandon, only 13 at the time, merely shrugged, muttered something, and turned back into the house as if my departure wasn't worth his concern. My mother, who had left the family a year earlier, left me only a short letter, her handwriting trembling. "Thatcher, you are my hope. Don't let them hurt you. ... I tucked the letter into my jacket pocket, boarded the dusty red bus, my heart heavy, but brimming with resolve. The military is not a place for the weak. On my first day at boot camp, I was thrust into an alien world where everything was measured by sweat, discipline, and endurance. In the early mornings, when the sky was still, pitch black, we were dragged out of bed to run in the biting cold, our breath turning to white mist in the air. I remember my new boots blistering my feet, but I didn't dare stop or complain. "Stand up straight, Row," the drill sergeant roared, his voice tearing through the morning fog. I gritted my teeth, my shoulders aching under the weight of a heavy backpack. But in my mind, I heard my grandfather's voice. "Honor is something you must earn, Thatcher. No one hands it to you." Those first months were an unending series of challenges. I learned how to shoot a rifle, how to bandage wounds in battlefield conditions, how to stay calm when everything around me was falling apart. Some nights, lying on my bunk, staring at the tent ceiling, I wondered if I had the strength to keep going. But then my grandfather's image would appear, sitting under the oak tree, recounting his days in Normandy, how he and his comrades survived battles where death lurked every second. "You don't need to be the strongest," he once told me, "but you must be the one who never gives up." Those words became the fire that warmed me through the harshest days. After training, I was deployed to various parts of the world. First was a base in the Middle East, where the desert heat scorched everything from skin to spirit. I remember night patrols on dusty roads, gripping my rifle, ear straining for the slightest sound, the whistle of wind over rocks, the footsteps of my teammates, or sometimes the distant hum of an engine signaling danger. Once a mine exploded, just meters from my team. The ground shook, dust and smoke filled the air, and a teammate's scream pierced the night. I rushed to him, pulling him from the rubble, his blood soaking my uniform. He survived, but his panicked eyes haunted me for months. Moments like those taught me that war isn't just about survival. It's about keeping your soul from being torn apart. From the Middle East, I was sent to Southeast Asia, where dense jungles and oppressive humidity made everything suffocating. I learned to move in darkness, to read maps under the faint glow of a flashlight, to stay silent even as my heart pounded in my chest. But no matter how tough the missions were, I always carried one thing: my grandfather's letters. He wrote regularly, one letter a month, his firm handwriting on thin paper. He wrote about the new harvest, the old horse he still tended, the mornings he spent on the porch watching the sunrise. But above all, he wrote about me. "You're doing the right thing, Thatcher," he wrote in one letter. "Life will test you, but don't let it make you forget who you are." I kept those letters in a small metal box tucked at the bottom of my backpack like a talisman. When I was 23, I was stationed in Alaska, where I would spend many years. Alaska was a different world. Snow-covered mountains, endless pine forests, and skies so clear you could see the Milky Way on cloudless nights. I worked at an Air Force base near Anchorage, participating in missions to protect airspace and support search and rescue operations. The work here was less dangerous than my previous postings, but Alaska's cold and isolation had their own challenges. Some days I stood on a hill overlooking the base, my breath turning to mist, wondering if I was living up to my grandfather's expectations. In Alaska, I met Miranda. She worked at a hospital near the base, a nurse with brown hair tied high and a smile that melted the winter cold. The first time we met, I was sitting in a small coffee shop trying to warm my hands with a hot cup of coffee. She walked in, ordered a tea, and when our eyes met, I felt a jolt run through me. "You're a soldier, aren't you?" she asked, her voice gentle but confident. I nodded, and from there we started talking about Alaska, about the long, sunless days, about the dreams we once held. Miranda had a way of making me feel at ease, as if I could shed the armor I'd worn since enlisting. Our dates often took place in small Anchorage bars, where dim lights and the smell of burning wood from fireplaces created a warm atmosphere. She told me about her childhood in a small Oregon town, her dream of becoming a doctor, but settling for nursing because life didn't go as planned. I told her about my grandfather, about my days in Bozeman, but I avoided mentioning my father and Brandon. Perhaps I didn't want her to see the wounded part of me, the part I'd tried to bury long ago. When I was 25, Miranda got pregnant. It was a winter evening, snow falling thickly outside the window of the small apartment we rented near the base. She sat on the sofa, hands cradling her belly, her eyes a mix of worry and joy. "Thatcher, I'm pregnant," she said, her voice trembling. I knelt before her, took her hands, and in that moment, all the exhaustion and pain of my military years seemed to vanish. "We'll be a family," I said, and I truly believed it. I proposed to her the next week on a snow-covered hill under the shimmering northern lights. She nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks, and I thought it was the start of a new life. We married in a simple ceremony at a small Anchorage church. None of my family was there. My father and Brandon didn't respond to the invitation, and my mother, who had moved somewhere in California, sent only a congratulatory card. But I didn't care. I had Miranda. And a few months later, we had Joey, a tiny girl with big round eyes, just like my grandfather's. I'd found my true purpose, not just to survive, but to protect, to love, to build the family I never had growing up. But that happiness didn't last. Life in Alaska was harsher than I'd imagined. Missions that kept me away for weeks, sometimes months, meant I was often absent. I'd return exhausted, my mind filled with images I couldn't share with Miranda. She began to change. Her smiles faded. Her hugs felt forced. She complained about the cold, the cramped rental house, how I was never truly there, even when sitting right in front of her. "Thatcher, I don't know if I can keep doing this," she said once, her voice as cold as the Alaskan wind. I tried to comfort her, to make things better. But I couldn't change the nature of my job. The military was a promise I'd made to my grandfather, to myself. Meanwhile, my family in Bozeman became almost like distant shadows. My father never called or checked in. Brandon, now a real estate agent in Bozeman, lived a reckless life I only heard about through acquaintances. Spent money like water, partied all night, and never mentioned me. I tried not to care, but each time I thought of them, a dull pain stirred. My grandfather remained the one bright spot in my life. His letters still arrived regularly, each one a flame warming me through the cold days. "You are my pride, Thatcher," he wrote in the last letter I received. "Keep fighting, not just for your country, but for yourself." When I was 35, a phone call turned everything upside down. I was at the base, just back from a long overseas mission. The phone rang at midnight, and a trembling voice from an old Bozeman neighbor came through. "Thatcher, your grandfather, he's gone. Stroke this morning." I stood frozen, clutching the phone, feeling the world collapse beneath me. My grandfather, the man I admired most, who taught me everything I knew about courage and honor, was gone. I didn't cry. Not then. I only felt a vast emptiness in my chest, as if a part of me had been ripped away. I immediately requested leave, arranging to take Joey, then 7 years old, to Bozeman for the funeral. When I told Miranda, she just nodded and said, "I'm busy at the hospital. You and Joey go." I didn't argue, though. I had an uneasy feeling. I thought she needed time, space, but I was wrong. The flight from Anchorage to Bozeman felt endless. Joey sat beside me, clutching the doll my grandfather had given her, her eyes red but holding back tears. "Did Grandpa hurt Daddy?" she asked, her voice tiny. I pulled her close, trying to keep my voice steady. "No, sweetheart. He just went to a better place." But deep down, I wasn't sure I believed that. To me, my grandfather was immortal, a mountain that would never fall. And now that mountain was gone. The funeral took place in a small Bozeman church where my grandfather had gone every Sunday. Air was cold, not just from the Montana weather, but from the tension among those present. My father stood in a corner wearing an old black suit, his gaze sharp as a knife. Brandon, now a man with slicked back blonde hair and an expensive suit, stood beside him, his eyes avoiding mine. Neither of them hugged Joey or offered me condolences. They just looked at me as if I were a stranger intruding on their world. I held Joey's hand, leading her to the coffin. My grandfather lay there, his face serene, but devoid of the light in his eyes I'd cherished. I placed a white daisy on his chest, his favorite flower, a reminder of my grandmother. "Thank you," I whispered, "for everything." Joey squeezed my hand, and I knew she was trying to be strong for me, as I had once tried to be for my grandfather. As the ceremony ended, a cold breeze swept through, as if my grandfather's spirit was reminding me that the real challenges still lay ahead. I wasn't wrong, but followed the reading of the will, the betrayal. And the secrets unveiled would thrust me into a storm I was never prepared to face. My grandfather's funeral left me with a hollow feeling, as if a part of my soul had been swept away by the Montana wind. I held Joey's hand, leading her out of the church, trying to hide the pain tearing at my chest. The crowd slowly dispersed, leaving behind whispers about my grandfather, a strong man, a veteran, a self-made millionaire farmer. But to me, he was more than those titles. He was the one who taught me how to stand tall when the world tried to bring me down. The reading of the will was scheduled for the next day at my grandfather's lawyer's office in downtown Bozeman. I didn't want to stay in town longer than necessary. The stifling atmosphere, with the probing stares from my father and Brandon, made me feel like an outsider in my own hometown. But I knew I had to stay, not just for my grandfather, but for Joey. She deserved to know her grandfather's legacy, whatever it might be. That morning I woke early in the small motel room Joey and I had rented near the town center. Joey was still asleep, clutching the doll my grandfather had given her. I stood by the window, looking out at the fog-covered street, trying to muster the courage for what lay ahead. I didn't expect anything from the will. My grandfather had already given me so much, from life lessons to faith in myself. But deep down, I felt a creeping unease, as if something was waiting to erupt. The lawyer's office was in an old red brick building with tall windows and the faint smell of aged paper. Eyes. As I entered, Joey held my hand tightly, her eyes scanning the room with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. My father was already there, seated at the head of the table, his black suit wrinkled, his gaze as cold as ever. Brandon sat beside him, dressed sharply in an expensive gray suit, but his eyes avoided mine, fixed on his phone. Neither of them greeted me or Joey. The air in the room was heavy, like a storm about to break. My grandfather's lawyer, Harold Grayson, was an older man with white hair and a deep, deliberate voice. He sat behind his desk, a thick stack of documents before him, his eyes sweeping the room as if assessing us. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice steady, but carrying a weight that silenced everyone. "Today we will read the last will and testament of Samuel Rowe, executed and notarized on March 12th of last year." A jolt ran down my spine. Joey gripped my hand tighter, as if she too sensed the tension. I glanced at my father, who sat upright, hands clasped tightly, his eyes locked on Grayson, as if trying to see through him.
Ow.
Brandon, on the other hand, seemed indifferent, but I noticed his fingers tapping restlessly on the table, nervous. Habit I remembered from our childhood. Grayson opened the documents, adjusted his reading glasses, and began to read. His voice rang out clearly, each word carving itself into the air. "I, Samuel Rowe, of sound mind and free will, declare this to be my last will and testament. My estate, including the farm, investments, and bank accounts, shall be divided equally. 50% to my grandson Thatcher Row, and the remaining 50% to be split equally between my son, Douglas Row, and my grandson, Brandon Row. Silence enveloped the room. My breath grew heavier. 50%. It was a figure far larger than I'd ever imagined. I had never thought much about my grandfather's wealth. To me, he was a man of fields and stories, not a millionaire. But now, as the figure was announced, I felt the weight of my father's end. Brandon's gazes sharp as knives. My father shot to his feet, the chair scraping against the wooden floor. "What?" he roared, his voice trembling with rage. "That kid gets half the estate? He's done nothing?" He ran off living his wandering soldier life while Brandon and I stayed here taking care of Dad for years. I froze, not because of his words, but because of the hatred in his voice. Joey pressed closer to me, her eyes wide with fear. I placed a hand on her shoulder, trying to keep my voice calm. "Dad, calm down. This was Grandpa's wish." "His wish?" My father sneered, stepping closer to Grayson's desk. "His wish was manipulated by you, wasn't it? You fed him those war stories, those sappy words to worm your way in, didn't you?" He pointed. At me, his face flushed with anger. Brandon, for the first time since entering, looked up. "Dad, calm down," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. I recognized his look, not anger, but jealousy, an emotion I'd seen in him since we were kids. Grayson raised a hand, signaling for silence. "Mr. Douglas, please sit down," he said, his voice calm but sharp. "The will has been legally notarized. But if you wish to contest it, I advise you to remain calm." My father didn't listen. He snatched the will from the desk, his eyes scanning the lines as if searching for a flaw. Then, to the shock of everyone in the room, he threw the papers into the burning fireplace in the corner. The flames flared, consuming the pages in an instant. "I'll take this to court," he shouted. "I'll claim what rightfully belongs to me and Brandon." Joey burrowed deeper into my side, and my heart pounded. I wanted to stand, to shout at my father that he had no right, that my grandfather chose me because he knew I wouldn't let money blind me, but I didn't. I just sat there holding Joey, trying to stay calm for her sake. And then Grayson did something that silenced the room. He slowly opened his desk drawer and pulled out another set of documents bound in dark blue with a red seal. "Mr. Douglas," he said, his voice low like thunder, "you just destroyed a copy of the will." But Samuel anticipated this possibility. He held up the documents, his gaze sweeping over everyone in the room. "This is the second will, executed on the same day as the first, and also legally notarized." My father stood frozen, his face pale. Brandon leaned back in his chair, mouth agape. My pulse raced, not out of joy, but from a premonition that what came next would change everything. Grayson opened the second will and read, his voice like a verdict, "In the event that the first will is contested, destroyed or otherwise unenforceable, I, Samuel Rowe, bequeath my entire estate, including the farm, investments, and bank accounts, to my grandson, Thatcher Row, the only one who understands the value of honor." The room fell silent, so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. Joey looked up at me, her big eyes full of questions. My father, after a moment of stunned silence, lost control. "No, this is a forgery. He couldn't do this." He lunged toward the desk, but Grayson raised a hand, his gaze sharp as a blade. "Mr. Douglas, this will was notarized in the presence of 2 witnesses and a notary public. If you wish to challenge it, you may take it to court, but I warn you, if you continue to destroy documents, you will face serious legal consequences." Brandon shot to his feet, his chair clattering behind him. "Thatcher, what did you do?" he yelled, finally looking me in the eye. "What did you say to Grandpa to make him do this? You stole everything?" His voice trembled, not just with anger, but with desperation. I knew he didn't care about our grandfather. He cared about the money. I looked at Brandon, then at my father, searching for words, but nothing came out. I only felt a profound sadness, not for them, but for my grandfather, who had spent his life building a legacy only to see his family tear each other apart over it. "Enough," I said, my voice low but firm. I stood, taking Joey's hand. Let's go, sweetheart. I didn't look back at my father or Brandon as I left the room. I only heard my father shouting something about suing me to the end and Brandon muttering a curse under his breath. As we stepped outside, the cold Bozeman air stung my face. Joey looked up at me, her eyes brightening slightly. Daddy, Grandpa left everything to you because he loved you, right? I smiled, though my heart was heavy. Yes, sweetheart, but not because of the money. He left me a lesson that honor matters more than anything. Back at the motel, I sat by the window, looking out at the distant fields. My grandfather's second will was not just a gift, but a burden. I knew my father and Brandon wouldn't stop. They would try to take what they believed was theirs, no matter the cost. And I, though reluctant, would have to face them not just for the money, but for honor, for the promise I'd kept to my grandfather. But what I didn't expect was that the real storm wouldn't come only from my father and Brandon. It came from the place I least anticipated, from Miranda, the woman I once loved, and from secrets I was never prepared to face. After the reading of the will, Joey and I left Bozeman the very next day. I didn't want to stay a minute longer in that town filled with painful memories. My father's angry shouts, Brandon's jealous glares, and the suffocating atmosphere of the lawyer's office clung to me like a shadow. Back in Alaska, I tried to return to the rhythm of everyday life. The Air Force Base in Anchorage was the same as ever. Long workdays, night patrols under a frigid sky, and early mornings when I stood on a hill looking down at the snow-covered mountains. But everything felt different. My grandfather's will, though a gift, had changed how I saw things. I was no longer just a soldier, a husband, a father. I was the one my grandfather had chosen, the bearer of his legacy. Not just in wealth, but in honor. I decided not to change my lifestyle despite the immense fortune now in my name. My grandfather's estate, the sprawling farm in Bozeman, investments and bank accounts, was estimated to be worth around $15 million. It was a figure far beyond anything I'd imagined, but I didn't want it to define me. I continued living in the small rented house near the base with its worn wooden walls and old fireplace. I still drove my beat-up truck, wore simple clothes, and spent my days off playing with Joey, teaching her how to make kites or bake cookies in our cramped kitchen. Miranda, however, noticed the change. She didn't say anything right away, but I saw a shift in her eyes, a curiosity, a hint of greed, lurking beneath. One evening after Joey had gone to bed, we sat by the fireplace, its glow flickering across her face. She held a glass of wine, her fingers lightly circling the rim, then looked at me. "Thatcher," she said, her voice soft, but with an edge. "Have you thought about what to do with the money?" I shrugged, trying to keep my tone casual. "Not much yet. Want things to settle first. Maybe set up a fund for Joey, or for people who need it." She nodded, but I saw her lips tighten, as if holding something back. "You should think more carefully," she said after a pause. "I mean, that money, it could change everything. We could buy a bigger house, move somewhere warmer. Alaska isn't the place to raise Joey forever." I heard the discontent in her voice, something I'd grown familiar with in recent years. "Miranda, I don't want to change everything just because of money," I said, keeping my voice gentle. "I want to live like my grandfather did, simply, without letting money blind me." She gave a short, scoffing laugh, a small sound that startled me. "Simply, Thatcher. Simplicity won't sustain us forever. What if something happens to you? What about Joey and me? Should transfer some of the assets to my name and Joey's to be safe, you know? If your father and brother come back, they won't have a claim." Her words made sense, at least on the surface. I nodded, saying I'd talk to a lawyer to look into it. But deep down, unease stirred. I couldn't explain it, but something in the way Miranda spoke, the way she looked at me, the way she emphasized safe, made me feel like I was standing before a door leading into darkness. Still, I didn't let myself dwell on baseless suspicions. I focused on Joey and my work, trying to keep life steady. With a small portion of my grandfather's estate, I set up a scholarship fund in his name for the children of veterans. It was something I knew he'd be proud of, a way for his legacy to live on, not just in money, but in opportunities for others. I didn't tell Miranda about the fund. I don't know why, but I felt the need to keep it to myself, like a secret between me and my grandfather. Weeks passed, and I began to notice small changes in our family life. Joey, usually chatty and cheerful, grew quieter. She would sit alone, drawing pictures with strange images, a woman standing in the dark, a house with broken windows. I asked her what was wrong, but she just shook her head, her big round eyes filled with worry. I thought maybe she was still grieving for her grandfather, so I tried to spend more time with her, taking her fishing, teaching her archery, and telling her stories about him. Miranda, meanwhile, grew more distant. She often came home late, saying she had night shifts at the hospital. I didn't question it. Her job had always been demanding, and I was used to her being away. But there were moments when she sat across from me, her gaze drifting somewhere I couldn't reach, as if she was in a place I couldn't touch. One evening after dinner, Miranda brought up the estate again. We were in the living room, Joey already. In bed, the fireplace's flames danced, casting shadows on the wooden walls. Miranda sat on the sofa, legs curled up, a glass of wine in her hand. "Thatcher, have you talked to the lawyer yet?" she asked, her voice light but sharp. I sighed, setting my coffee mug down. "I will, Miranda. But I want things to be clear first." "I don't want to rush," she frowned, placing her wine glass on the table. "Rush, Thatcher? You're stalling? You don't trust me, do you?" I was taken aback by the sharpness in her voice. "Not that. I just want to do right by Grandpa's wishes." "This money isn't just money. It's a responsibility." Miranda laughed, a bitter sound. "Responsibility? You're always talking about honor, about your grandfather. But do you ever think about Joey and me? Do you think I want to spend my life in this freezing base, in this cramped rental?" I felt a surge of heat in my chest, but held it back. "Miranda, I'm trying to do what's best. I don't want that money to change us." She looked at me, her eyes cold. "Maybe you don't want it to, but I do." She stood, grabbed her wine glass, and walked into the bedroom, leaving me with a feeling like a knife had pierced my heart. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay on the sofa, staring at the ceiling, trying to understand what was happening. Miranda had never talked about money like this before, or had I been too blind to notice? I thought of my grandfather's letters, his words about honor. I wondered if I was doing the right thing, or if I was letting the past control the present. The next morning, I drove Joey to school. She was silent the whole way, holding my hand tightly. When I kissed her forehead goodbye, she looked at me, her eyes seeming to want to say something, but holding back. "I love you, Daddy," she said, then ran into class. On the way back, I pulled over on a quiet road, looking out at a snow-covered field. I took my grandfather's pocket watch from my jacket, running my fingers over the engraved words, "Honor is the greatest legacy." I closed my eyes, trying to find answers in his teachings, but no answers came. Instead, a growing sense of dread swelled within me. Alaska in winter is a world of ice and silence. In the days following the tense conversation with Miranda, I tried to focus on my work at the base and my time with Joey. But the sense of unease clung to me like the cold seeping through my jacket. I began noticing small details I'd previously overlooked. The way Miranda frequently checked her phone with a tense expression. The way she avoided my gaze when I asked about her night shifts. The way she kept mentioning moving somewhere else, as if Alaska were a prison she needed to escape. Joey, more sensitive than anyone I've ever known, was changing too. She no longer chattered about school like she used to. Instead, she often sat alone in her room drawing strange pictures. A woman standing in the dark, house with broken windows, or sometimes a man with blonde hair standing by a door. I asked her about the drawings, but Joey just shook her head, her big round eyes filled with worry. "It's just drawing, Daddy," she said. But the tremble in her voice told me she was hiding something. One afternoon, I decided to spend the entire day with Joey to pull her out of her silence. I took her to a lake near the base where the frozen surface shimmered under the pale sunlight. We sat on a rock wrapped in a shared blanket, tossing small pebbles to watch them skid across the ice. "Do you miss Grandpa?" I asked, trying to find a way to start a conversation. Joey nodded, clutching her doll tighter. I miss him. He used to tell me stories about horses. He said I was like a little foal, always running around. She smiled, but the smile faded quickly. Daddy, I have something to tell you, but I'm scared. I turned to her, placing a hand on her shoulder. Scared of what, sweetheart? You know, I'm always here. Joey looked down, her fingers twisting the edge of the blanket. I saw Mommy and Uncle Brandon. They were kissing. Her voice was tiny, as if she feared the words themselves. It was when he came to the house when you were on patrol. I saw them in the kitchen. I didn't know what to do. My heart stopped. I looked at Joey, searching for any sign that she was imagining things, that this was just a child's misunderstanding. But her eyes, bright and honest, just like my grandfather's, told me it was true. I felt a rush of heat in my head, followed by an icy chill. Down my spine, Miranda, and Brandon, my wife and my brother. I wanted to scream, to rush home and confront her immediately. But I looked at Joey, saw her trembling, and knew I had to stay calm for her sake. Don't worry, I said, my voice. I'll handle it. You were so brave to tell me. Grandpa would be proud of you. I pulled Joey into my arms, feeling my heart constrict. She buried herself in my chest, sobbing, and I realized she'd been carrying this pain alone for too long. That night I waited for Miranda to come home. She walked in, her coat dusted with snow, her face tired but composed. I sat at the kitchen table, my grandfather's pocket watch in front of me, a reminder of what I needed to protect. Miranda, we need to talk, I said, my voice calm but cold. She frowned, taking off her coat and hanging it on the hook. About what? The will again? No, I said, looking straight into her eyes. About Joey seeing you and Brandon kissing in the kitchen. Miranda's face froze, but only for a second before she regained her composure. Joey? You're believing a child? She's 10, Thatcher. She could imagine anything. Anger flared inside me, but I held it back. Joey doesn't lie. It's not about something like this. Tell me the truth, Miranda. What's going on? She laughed, a forced sound. Really, you're accusing me of cheating based on a kid's words? Thatcher, do you really think I'm that kind of person? I stood, stepping closer to her. I don't want to think that, but I need the truth. If not from you, I'll find it another way. Miranda turned away, arms crossed. You want to find out? Go ask the neighbors. Ask your colleagues. Ask whoever. You won't find anything. But I did. The days that followed, I paid closer attention. Spoke to our elderly neighbor, Mrs. Helen, who often sat by her window and knew everything that happened on the street. Your brother, Brandon, she said slowly. I've seen him come by a few times when you weren't home. I didn't want to say anything, but they seemed closer than they should be. The ground seemed to collapse beneath me. I called a friend in Bozeman, asking him to check if Brandon had been leaving town often. The answer came faster than I expected. Brandon had been to Anchorage multiple times in the past few months, always coinciding with my long patrol shifts. Each piece of the puzzle started to fit together, forming a picture I didn't want to see. A week later, I confronted Miranda again. This time I had proof, a text message I found on her phone which she'd carelessly left on the kitchen table. A message from Brandon. Meet you Friday. No. When I held the phone up to her, Miranda collapsed into a chair, her face pale. Okay, she said, her voice trembling. Okay, Thatcher, it's true, but it's not what you think. We just what? I cut in, my voice sharp as a knife. Just kissing in our kitchen, just meeting behind my back, just betraying this family. Miranda cried, but I felt nothing but coldness. You're never here, Thatcher, she shouted. You're always at the base, always with your work, your damn honor. Brandon, he was there. He listened to me. He made me feel alive. Her words stabbed my heart like a knife. But more painful than that was the realization that Brandon, my brother, whom I'd tried to love despite his indifference, had betrayed me in the cruelest way. I stood there looking at the woman I once loved and realized she'd become a stranger. I didn't yell or break anything. I just turned away, walked into Joey's room, and saw her sleeping, her face peaceful like an angel's. I sat by her bed, holding her small hand, and vowed to protect her no matter the cost. Miranda could betray me. Brandon could turn his back on me. But Joey, she was the reason I kept fighting. In the days that followed, I began preparing for what was to come. I knew I couldn't keep living under the same roof as Miranda. I knew my father and Brandon wouldn't stop in their fight for the inheritance. And deep down, I knew this journey would bring more pain before I found peace. In the days following the revelation about Miranda and Brandon, I felt like I was walking on a thin tightrope suspended above a storm. Alaska, with its snow-covered fields and icy skies, was no longer a refuge. Every corner of the small rented house, the kitchen table where Miranda and I once shared dinners, the sofa where she used to sit and talk about her dreams now, only evoked painful memories. I looked at Joey with her big round eyes and fragile smile and told myself I had to be strong, not for me, but for her. The decision to divorce didn't come immediately. I spent many nights sitting alone in the living room, the firelight dancing, searching for another way out. Wondered if I could forgive Miranda, if I could salvage our family for Joey's sake. But every time I looked at my grandfather's pocket watch, the inscription, "Honor is the greatest legacy," served as a stark reminder. Honor wasn't just about loyalty to my country or my grandfather. It was about loyalty to myself, to the values I believed in, and I couldn't live with someone who had betrayed me, betrayed Joey in the most cruel way. One morning, as snow fell lightly outside the window, I called a lawyer in Anchorage. He was a middle-aged man with a calm voice and agreed to meet me that same day. I dropped Joey off at school, forcing a smile so she wouldn't worry. "Will you be home early today?" she asked, clutching her backpack, her eyes full of hope. "Absolutely, sweetheart," I said, ruffling her hair. "We'll make cookies tonight, okay?" Joey smiled, but I could see the worry lingering like a shadow in her eyes. The meeting with the lawyer took place in a small, warm office filled with bookshelves and the faint smell of coffee. I told him everything. About Miranda, about Brandon, about my grandfather's will. Listened, taking careful notes, then looked at me over his glasses. "Thatcher, what do you want from this divorce?" he asked. "Full custody of Joey," I replied without hesitation. "And I want to ensure my grandfather's estate isn't touched. It belongs to Joey, not Miranda." He nodded, explaining that, since the estate was my personal inheritance, Miranda would have a hard time claiming any of it. But he warned that she could contest custody, and that wouldn't be easy. "She's Joey's mother," he said. "Courts usually favor both parents, unless you have clear evidence of inappropriate behavior." I thought of the text messages between Miranda and Brandon, Joey's account, and the times Mrs. Helen saw Brandon at the house. "I'll have evidence," I said, my voice firm. "I'll do whatever it takes to protect my daughter." The final confrontation with Miranda happened on a cold evening. Joey was asleep, and the house was silent except for the wind whistling through the window frames. Miranda sat on the sofa, cradling a coffee mug, her eyes avoiding mine. I placed the divorce papers in front of her, the pages as cold as the air between us. "Thatcher, you don't have to do this," she said, her voice trembling. "We can work it out for Joey." "For Joey?" I repeated, my voice colder than I intended. "Did you think of Joey when you and Brandon were kissing in this kitchen? When you met him behind my back? When you let her carry that pain alone?" Miranda bowed her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. But I felt no pity. "Sign it, Miranda," I said. "Sign it, and we'll do this the decent way. If not, I'll take everything to court. The texts, the neighbor's testimony, all of it." She looked at me, her eyes filled with pain, but also a flicker of anger. "You think you're better than everyone, don't you? It's always talking about honor, about your grandfather. But have you ever thought about me? Have you ever really been here for me?" Her words struck a deep part of me where I'd always wondered if I'd been a good enough husband, a good enough father. But I shook my head, pushing those doubts away. "I tried, Miranda. My best, but you chose to destroy everything." She signed the papers, her hand trembling without another word. When she stood and left, I felt a vast emptiness in my chest, but also a sense of release. I had lost the woman I once loved, but I still had Joey, and that was all that mattered. The second decision came soon after: early retirement. After over 17 years in the military, I felt I'd reached my limit. The grueling missions, sleepless nights, and memories of the battlefield had left scars I never shared with anyone. But more than that, I wanted to be there for Joey, to give her a stable life free of the months spent waiting for her father to return from faraway missions. I submitted my retirement request to my superiors, a decision that wasn't easy. Commander Colonel Harris looked at me across his desk, his eyes full of regret. "Thatcher, you're one of the best soldiers I've ever known," he said. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure, sir," I replied. "My daughter needs me, and I need time to find myself again." He nodded, not pressing further. "You've served well, Row. If you ever need anything, come find me." On my last day at the base, I stood on the familiar hill looking down at the snow-covered mountains. I thought about the years gone by, the battles, my grandfather's letters, the nights I thought I wouldn't survive. The military had shaped me, but it had also taken so much. Now, I wanted to spend the rest of my life building, not fighting. My father and Brandon tried to contact me a few times afterward, leaving long messages about reconciliation. My father said he wanted to fix things, that he'd been too rash at the will reading. Brandon sent a short text apologizing for the misunderstanding and wanting to meet to talk. But I knew they weren't truly sorry. They wanted the money, not family. I didn't respond. I deleted their numbers from my phone, cutting off all contact. I didn't want Joey growing up in an environment filled with deceit and scheming. I packed up our belongings, gathering my grandfather's keepsakes, the pocket watch, his letters, a photo of him standing under the oak tree, and left Alaska with Joey. I didn't look back. The rented house, the snow-covered roads, the memories of Miranda, all belonged to the past. Out of me was a new journey, a chance to start over. Not just for me, but for Joey. Helena, Montana, welcomed Joey and me with its endless golden fields dotted with old oak trees and winding red dirt roads. I chose this place not only because it was near my grandfather's old farm, but also for its peace, a tranquility I craved after years of turmoil. The house I bought was a small log cabin nestled in the valley. With a porch overlooking the fields and an old oak tree I knew my grandfather had loved, that oak, with its gnarled trunk and sprawling canopy, was where he used to sit, reading the newspaper on summer afternoons when I was a boy, running around him, begging for stories. Our first days in Helena felt like those of two lost soldiers trying to find their way in a new world. Joey, with her big round eyes and shy smile, seemed to sense the change. She didn't ask much about Miranda, but I knew she missed her mother. Even if only the rare moments when Miranda had truly been a mother, I tried to fill that void by giving her all my time. We planted a small garden behind the house, tomatoes, pumpkins, and a few rows of lettuce that Joey eagerly tended. I taught her archery, watching her clumsily pull the bowstring, and laughed when her arrows veered into the grass. "Daddy, I'm terrible," she'd cry out, but her eyes sparkled with joy. Also set to work transforming the old shed behind the house into a small library. The shed, with its weathered wooden planks and moss-covered roof, was a relic from the time my grandfather owned this land. I spent weeks cleaning it out, building bookshelves, and hanging photos of him on the walls. In one corner I placed his pocket watch in a glass case, next to a picture of him standing under the oak tree, smiling with his radiant eyes. Joey loved sitting in that library, reading the old books my grandfather left behind, from adventure novels to war memoirs. "Daddy, did Grandpa really fight a whole army?" she asked, pointing to a book about World War II. I laughed, ruffling her hair. "Not quite, but he was the bravest man I ever knew. He taught me that sometimes fighting isn't about holding a gun. It's about standing firm when everything falls apart." Life in Helena wasn't glamorous, but it was enough. I didn't touch the bulk of my grandfather's inheritance, except to buy the house and fix up the shed. I wanted Joey to grow up with the values he taught me, that money doesn't define you, but how you live and treat others does. I took a part-time job at a machine repair shop in town, not because I needed the money, but because I wanted to stay busy, to feel like part of the community. But the past didn't let me go so easily. Occasionally I heard news of my father and Brandon through old acquaintances in Bozeman. They told me that Brandon and Miranda didn't end up together as I'd feared. After the divorce, Miranda moved to another city, working at a new hospital, and made no attempt to contact Joey. Brandon, meanwhile, continued his reckless lifestyle. But now without my father's financial support. My father, Douglas, seemed to have fallen out with Brandon, the two often arguing over their failure to inherit any of my grandfather's estate. I wasn't surprised, but I didn't feel any satisfaction either. I only felt a deep sadness, not for them, but for my grandfather, who had spent his life building a legacy, only to see his family fracture. Joey sometimes asked about my grandfather, my father, and Brandon. One evening, as we sat on the porch, watching the sun set over the fields, she asked, "Daddy, are you sad about Grandpa and Uncle Brandon? They didn't love you like Grandpa did. Did they?" I looked at her, my heart aching. "I'm not sad, sweetheart," I said, though I knew I was partly lying. "Grandpa fought for freedom, and I'm just learning to live up to that. Having you here is enough to make me happy." Joey smiled, snuggling into my side, and I felt a warmth spread through my chest. But deep down, I knew our journey wasn't over. The shadows of the past, my father, Brandon, and even Miranda, were still out there, waiting for a chance to return. And I, though no longer in the military, had to remain ready to fight, not with a gun, but with my heart and will. In the quiet days of Helena, I began writing down my grandfather's stories, the ones he told under the oak tree about war, love in Montana's fields. I wrote not to publish, but to preserve for Joey, for myself, and for future generations. I wrote about the battles he survived, how he and my grandmother built the farm from nothing, the nights he sat by the fire, telling me that honor was the one thing no one could take away. I also wrote about my own mistakes, the years I tried to please my father, the moments I doubted myself when Miranda betrayed me, the pain of cutting ties with my family. Writing was how I healed. Each word was a step toward letting go of the past, toward learning to forgive, not my father, Brandon, or Miranda, but myself. I realized I'd been too hard on myself, always striving to live up to my grandfather's image, forgetting that he too was human and made mistakes. He taught me that honor isn't about perfection, but about standing up after every fall. One evening, as I sat writing in the small library, Joey ran in, clutching an old tin box she'd found in the shed. "Daddy, look at this," she exclaimed, opening it. Inside was a stack of letters in my grandfather's firm handwriting, but they weren't addressed to me. They were from my grandmother, written during the years he was away at war. I held one, my hands trembling, and read her words. "Samuel, I don't know if you'll come back, but I know you'll always do what's right. I love you for that," I read. The letter aloud to Joey, and we sat there in the library's dim light, feeling the presence of my grandfather and grandmother. Those letters were a reminder that love, like honor, transcends time and trials. I looked at Joey, saw her smile, and knew that my grandfather's legacy would live on in us. Back in the present, I stand on the porch looking out at the autumn fields. Joey runs out, tugging my hand. "Daddy, come eat dinner. I made cookies." "Shh," she cries, her eyes shining like the moonlight. I laugh, take her hand, and walk inside. Dawes. We sit at the dinner table, watching Joey's radiant smile. I realize that the greatest legacy my grandfather left wasn't the money or the farm, but the ability to stand firm when everything collapses. It's Joey, the love between us, the simple days in Helena, where I found the true meaning of life. I glance out the window, where the old oak stands tall in the darkness. "Thank you, Grandpa," I whisper, knowing that somewhere he's smiling.